All right, well, I would just like to welcome everyone who's joined us today for this webinar series. This series was started as a collaboration between the Arkansas World Trade Center and the Supply Chain Management Research Center in the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas. My name is Donnie Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Supply Chain Management Research Center. And I'm just thrilled that when you're here today or you're listening in from a recorded version of this and learning from the content. I'm excited because of our panelists today. Dr. Remco van Hoek is world renowned as a procurement professional, and he's a faculty member in the Walton College. And so I'm thrilled that he's going to be moderating this session. And I'll let him introduce our other panelists in just a moment. In the meantime, I just want to tell the attendees that, as we go through, we want this to be as interactive as you would like it to be. If you've got questions during the session, please put those in the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll let Dr. Van Hoek know if there's any questions that need to be addressed at any point during the webinar. We've also set aside the last 15 minutes of the webinar for Q&A time that you can either use the chat feature for, or feel free to unmute and ask your questions in person. We would love to have your interaction there. And with that, Dr. Van Hoek, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being here today and sharing your wisdom and facilitating this discussion. Let me just kind of talk about real quick before I do that and turn it over. We're talking today about sourcing in a global environment. This is the second session in this webinar series. The first one, we did a very broad overview of the global environment, particularly as it relates to how Corona has changed the supply chain environment. And today we're focusing on sourcing, and then our next two will focus on logistics, challenges and opportunities, what it means to execute our logistics and supply chain. And then the last one will be entering new markets. But today we're focused on sourcing in a global environment, and I'm excited to turn it over to you, Remco, and let's have a great learning time. Well, it looks like Dr. Van Hoek's camera may have frozen a little bit, and so he probably has a spinning wheel, which I'm very familiar with. So I get to fill in a little bit of time here while we wait on his computer to unfreeze and he can get back with us. So in the meantime, Denise, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Denise has been our...
Thank you, Donnie, and thank you to you and...
Oh, you're freezing up again, Remco, so...
I actually think he's gone.
Okay, he's gone now?
Yes, I don't see him at all. Oh, he's at the bottom. Let's see. Well, you can pick on me until he comes back. How's that?
There you go. So Denise, why don't you talk a little bit while we're waiting on Remco to come back in about the impetus behind this webinar series?
Well, it really started with a couple of the people that are actually on the call today and talking about getting ready to be ready.
I'm still on. Did we drop?
You're back?
Yeah. What happened?
Okay. Not sure.
Remco, I'm going to let Denise finish this context about why we started this webinar series, and we're ready to turn it over to you as soon as she's done.
And I'll be brief. Basically, it's a part of the Get Ready to Be Ready series with the things that were happening with COVID. We wanted to make sure that our small businesses were prepared to launch or relaunch or modify or make some type of changes to help their business grow. We wanted to be as proactive about that as possible. So I reached out to Donnie and his team and Christine, and they were very supportive in helping us pull this series together to help facilitate educating and informing on accurate information, because there's a lot of information out there, but I don't know that it's all the right or the best information for SMEs, specifically for the companies that we work with here in Arkansas. So that's how we came about creating this program. So I want to thank you all for participating, and I want to thank the panelists for being here, and thank Donnie and Christine for helping pull this together.
Great. Well, Remco, it looks like we've got you back. And so technical issues, right? So they're just a natural part of the world we live in now. So I'll turn it over to you, and you can...
Apologies for that. So yes, thank you. Let's hope we remain stable in terms of the internet connectivity for the rest of the session. So so I'm Remco van Hoek. I teach sourcing and procurement at the Sam and Walton College of Business. I've been there for just over 2 years after returning to academia from industry, where I had supply chain and sourcing and procurement roles in a number of industries, in a number of countries, in small, in medium, and in larger sized companies. So it's my pleasure to be here with you today. Before we frame up the discussion, let's have Dale and Logan introduce themselves for a second, because there's a wealth of experience that we're going to tap into in our discussion. Dale, why don't you go first, please?
Hi, hello, Remco. I am happy to be here today. I am a Vice President of Supply Chain and Operations at ASP Global. We're a medical products company out of the Atlanta, Georgia area. I've been a supply chain leader for approximately 30 plus years. We'll keep it at that. Extensive background in both international and domestic, but a lot of international experience, which first started in 1994 when I was with Walmart, just up the road from you there in Bentonville, and did some opening of some distribution activity in China. So that was my first international experience. I've got extensive experience in working with sourcing and logistics activities out of Asia, and have put a great deal of emphasis over the last 14 years in the, moving products in and out of the country of India. So from 2006 on, I've probably been to India about 15 times and have been involved with several different trade groups in movement of products out of India.
Super. Glad to have you here, Dale. Logan.
Yep. Hey, thanks, Remco. So I'm Logan Hellinghausen. I've been in food supply chain for the last 5 years. I worked previously for Simmons Foods, a poultry company here in Northwest Arkansas. I worked there for 2.5 years, and I was a production scheduler at one of the plants. And then more recently, my current position, I'm a shellfish product manager at the fishing company in Rogers, which is a fancy word for sourcing manager. So I source shellfish for the fishing company, which is one of the bigger seafood importers in the world. So we're the industry leader in tilapia imports. So we have a lot of product on the ocean. We do tilapia, we do salmon, we do shrimp, we do mussels. And so I'm focused on shrimp out of Southeast Asia and mussels out of South America. So,
glad to have you here, Logan. What we wanted to do is to frame up our discussion a little bit. In addition to teaching sourcing and procurement, I advise and I coach a lot of companies, and we were able to develop a little bit of a benchmark on what's been happening, what is happening, and what's going to happen in the context of global sourcing in the pandemic. And so I wanted to share just a few data points just to ground us into what is the benchmark, what's happening out there. Starting on this page. What you're seeing here is results from a survey of about 100 respondents, different size companies, different industries in different parts of the world. And we looked at what sort of risks have you experienced in the context of the pandemic. And this data was collected right when we hit the first peak. So this is March and early April. And you're seeing there the degree to which different risks are experienced, with the varying types of risks on the left there. Obviously, supply disruptions were a major one, but so were fluctuations in demand. And as a result, resulting risks in transportation and manufacturing and processes. There's a little bit of good news in there that control and process risks were experienced less so, which to me is an encouraging indicator that we as supply chain managers may have our hands on the process and our controls are working to respond to it. But a lot of risks. And so the next page talks a little bit about, well, what drove that? And it's an interesting pattern that takes us straight to the topic of discussion for today, because this is these are average scores on a 4-point scale of what is driving these risks. And if you look at the bottom, it's not only volatility in demand, but it's even more so the globalized nature of our supply chain. And I take that in combination with the top, the second and third bar there. It's not only that our supply chain is globalized, it is also involving a very reduced supply base of a small number of specialized factories, which introduces us to an awful lot of dependency on global sources, few in number, and great in specialization. Meaning to say, if we have a disruption in one of those, it might sort of grind the entire supply chain to a halt. And the volatility in demand makes that risks only more severe and challenging. Proliferation of goods and services is an interesting one. You may have seen how Coke has come out, for example, with the intention to far reduce proliferation of goods and services to make the supply chain more manageable in the face of all these risks and volatility. So what to do about it? On the next page, the last little bit, on the left, a ton of practical approaches that we can consider to respond to those risks and to build for a more resilient supply chain and an ability to be more agile and responsive in our global sourcing operations. And then the columns represent the degree to which those are used at what point in time. So the first point here is that if you look at the do not use, those are pretty low percentages. So the immediate takeaway is across all of those mechanisms that we can consider, most of those are widely considered, and it's typically that companies are looking at a range of initiatives and practices to adopt. Second main point is that not all of those are as relevant or as feasible at any point in time. So if you look at the top there, inventory buffering, which is let's add a bit of inventory proactively to reduce the risk of running out of stock. You can see that that is predominantly used as a short-term response, right? Something goes wrong, can we find some extra inventory to shelter us from that? It is less relevant the further you move to the right and you take a longer-term horizon. Many of the other initiatives are mostly relevant in the mid to longer term. And that is why it is so relevant for us to be talking about topics such as reducing reliance on a few factories, ensuring flexible and alternative sources, including near and local sourcing in our supply chain, and improving collaboration with most strategic suppliers, because those things you can start in the short term, but the majority of work is for the mid to longer term because of the amount of effort it involves and how careful you have to be in going about putting those practices into place. So even though we are now a couple months into the pandemic, this topic has only become more relevant because now is the time for us to begin to orient ourselves to moving beyond short-term responses towards building towards a more structurally and sustainable, resilient supply chain. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So what we wanted to do, we can take this page off, Christine. What we wanted to do is to start with you, Dale and Logan, to get your perspective on those time horizons. So could you, maybe starting with you, Logan, take us through a little bit when the pandemic hit, what changed? What changed in your supply chain? What did you do in the immediate response? And what are you looking at doing, looking ahead at the next couple months to build towards a more structurally resilient supply chain?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, we were having really consistent supply. So we were focused in India. We were sourcing all of our shrimp from India, and we had pretty consistent supply. We had pretty consistent demand. And the biggest struggle was staying within our weeks of supply. So we were aiming to be anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks of supply. And so we had, by the time the pandemic hit, we had 3 months of supply on every one of our SKUs. We had done pretty well at that. And within a month, we sold through all of that. So that was an insane spike in demand. So everything that we had for April, May, June was gone. And then what was left in the pipeline was still having to go through its normal process coming across the ocean, which is really the planning process for that is 3 months. So instantly we got put in a 3-month hole where, India wasn't shut down yet. And we had to find a way to fill those gaps. So we started looking domestically for any shrimp that we could find. So the first issue that we came across was the spike in demand. And then since then, it's just been the continual rise of demand. And it's kind of tabled off a little bit now, but that continued high retail due to restaurants being shut down has caused the demand for shrimp and other meat in the retail industry to go up. And so we've had to deal with that as well as India shutting down. And so during COVID, we had to move away from our Indian supplier partners, and we had to go to Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and start to build partnerships, bring them up to speed with our demand, and try and stay diversified while meeting our volume demand from the retail industry. So that was the biggest struggle during COVID, was building those relationships. Some that we had little to no interaction with before, some that we had as previous partners. And then moving forward, and right now we're still doing that. We've kind of caught up. We've got our heads above the water in terms of our inventory, but now it's like, as soon as you get that, you have holidays coming up. And then for seafood, right after that, you have Lent coming up. And so you have these big spikes in demand. And so it's kind of a never ending process. But what we're doing to navigate that is build more supply partners in different countries, and then keeping a higher buffer on inventory. So instead of 8 to 12, we're looking at 12 to 15, just because we want to stay ahead of that, because we've seen during COVID what happens when we fall behind.
Yeah, thank you, Logan. I love the story you shared before about, in October, you and the team were looking at, well, we've got 2 sources of supply. They're both in India. Something better not happen in India. And guess what happened? So you're really bringing to life the danger involved of a highly rationalized, specialized supply base that's concentrated in just a few locations. And what you're bringing to life is the need to focus on inventory and doing short-term buffering. A company that I've been advising at the start of the pandemic said, we've got 4 weeks of inventory on the sea, and after that, I've got nothing coming. Kind of similar to what you're saying, and your response to not necessarily move away from global sourcing. I'm not hearing you say that, but still diversifying both in terms of geography and in suppliers involved to reduce your dependence on those few. So that's interesting. So we'll dig into how you do that more so. But Dale, I'd love to get you on the board. What changed for you? What did you do, and what's on the agenda to do moving forward?
Well, pre-COVID, organizations similar to ours, we were all focused on the headwinds of the tariffs. So if you think about it, a lot of it was a cost out type structure, and it was associated with, think about diversification was the word that was most prominently involved with companies. And we were looking at how we could lower dependence upon China sourcing. So that was the first thing. And then when early COVID hit, we ended up with, if you think about it, from roughly January through February, March, China was, for the most part, dormant and was extremely constrained. But then come March, April, organizations around the world began in a frantic way working to get materials out of China as quickly as possible. So if you think about it, everybody was headed to the same supplier base, trying to move products in much the same way at the same time. And what that presented to the world and what presented to logisticians around the world was a massive constraint, some inflationary pressures, and a great deal of stress in the logistics environment. So we went from diversification to get as much as you can, as fast as you can, and everybody hitting the same supply base. Presently, if you think about where we are related to the activities today, there's still some headwinds that are impacting freight and logistics capacity. But from a sourcing standpoint, diversification remains an overriding goal. So organizations, whether it's ASP Global or other organizations around the world, seek to be diverse in their sourcing approaches and seek to be as nimble as we possibly can. Donnie, I think we may have lost him again.
It looks like we might have lost Remco again. So I know he was gonna, so maybe I can jump in here really quick and you guys can talk about this. Remco mentioned that his kind of follow-up question that he wanted to dive into, particularly, the executable steps that you actually guys use. What were you thinking about strategically, and how did you, so Logan, you talked about this idea of finding new suppliers and kind of working through and making sure you could identify them. What were some of the steps that you went through that really we could apply to just about any size company, that, hey, these are some important things that you learned through this process?
Yeah. So going back to trying to find new suppliers, and you're asking, what did I learn from that process that I can pass on? And for me, one was not, for us, keeping track of past suppliers we worked with. So the first place we went when we were struggling was, okay, what plants have I worked with in the past, even on a small volume level, that have gotten us the compliance documents that we need, has met their delivery time frame that we need, who has been good producers and good partners in the past that may not be current packers. And that's where we started. And I think that was the big step for us, because we had one or two that we were able to pick right away and start working with just like that. We had been keeping up with their compliance documents. We had been keeping up with all the things that we need to just instantly work with them. And I think that was really important, to have a database of suppliers that you've worked with and to keep up with those suppliers. And I think the second is also, we were able to take good partners from both sides of the supply chain. So that being the plant, and then the other one was being our customer that also had connections. In this case, Walmart being able to help get in touch. And that's a name that, we've worked hard to build a relationship with them, and they're able to, we're able to use that partnership to our advantage. And so that was something that we had taken, talked to the buyer, said, this is what we think we need to do. Here are the solutions we think we need to go after, moving to Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. And I think we need to start contacting plants who are plants that you guys have been supplied by in the past that we could target. I think that was like the two main things that I think I would pass on.
Great. Dale, you want to share something along the same kind of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, prior to the pandemic, we were already starting to really strongly evaluate, diversity from a supply chain standpoint. And so, we had already put several things in place. In like November of last year, we were at the Medica event. I had my team there. There's 18 halls full of medical suppliers, if you think about it. And so, I mean, it's a very target-rich environment from a standpoint of networking and building relationships. So things like that help us a great deal in expanding our horizons and understanding some of the things that might be possible in some of the categories, especially where we sense that we have some vulnerability. And so then on the backside of that, we definitely fanned out. And prior to the travel restrictions, we were, moving out into some of those different countries, dispensing some of our team, not only, by the way, from the U.S., but also from China, into different countries to review options and to look at things that that might work for us.
So one of the
I think,
things
Dale, you had also mentioned that diversifying, you don't necessarily do it overnight, and it can take a little bit of time. If you're not as lucky as Logan was, that he had a lot of established and accredited suppliers, how do you do that if you don't have a bunch of phone numbers of people that you already know and already work with that you can call upon? And what are some of the issues there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak in a general way. There's a lot of trade organizations and a lot of, for each person that listens to this presentation or is on this particular call, each one of you has your own particular classifications of goods and services and providers, which you either work with or would like to work with. And you have needs. You have regulatory needs as an example, and you also have obviously specifications and needs that are driven by your customers, of course, as well. So once you have those needs in place, you're going to naturally progress and move to areas, whether it's promotional councils or different trade groups. A good example, and I'll just throw this out as an example from my past experience, there was a lot of involvement in handicrafts and works out of India. And I mentioned I was in India a few times. And so, for instance, There are trade groups like the Export Promotion Council for Handicrafts in India. And so there's, they typically hold trade fairs, and then people will be listening, well, I can't go to India and I can't go to a trade fair. Well, they have a virtual trade fair that happens next week that you can participate in, that they run roughly 12 hours a day, that you can actually still work at a virtual level to review options, look at different categories of products, and also look to see if you can, make connections and start to build relationships.
I believe your other suggestion also was you can look at agents that can do some of the legwork that you may not be able to do for you, or that may be too expensive for you to do, that can help you with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a presence in an area, in a geographic region, there are almost always agents that work in that area that that can facilitate your introduction into that area, into suppliers into the area. And then, the question always comes up is well, how do I know if the agent that, I'm going to work with is, I'll use the term legit, but is an honest and good, and, a good person to work with. And the issue is not that hard, but it does take a lot of work. And that is, as you introduce yourself, as you work with a particular sourcing agent, you're going to want to know what, number one, is culturally and from a relationship standpoint, do you guys seem to work well together from an introduction and from an early standpoint? Do they have the experience that you need specific to the companies that you want to work with, or with the product categories that you're working with? And then, of course, the most valuable thing that I've found is that no agent that you're going to want to work with tends to work in a vacuum, or it's not their first time for the most part. So you're going to find references available. And there's almost always an opportunity to check references with the agent that you're going to want to work, that you think you might want to work with. And I can think of a couple of occasions in the past where, that was the most important part of the due diligence in the process, is the ability to talk to either European or US based companies that have had a relationship with that particular agent, or currently is in relationship with that particular company. Of course, it often gets a little sensitive sometimes if there's competitive pressures there, if you're dealing in the same industries and in the same, from a competitive standpoint, in the same type of markets. But I have found most times that you can find opportunities to reference agents and to find out, how their responsiveness is and how good they are to work with.
Super, super helpful. Yeah. Logan, you're furthering the effort to diversify your supply base, and you're looking at additional sources. How do you go about, and what's your advice to SMEs that are looking at diversifying and finding new potential suppliers to work with? What are your suggestions?
Yeah, so I was going to add on to Dale. Sometimes I think the solution isn't as pretty as I would like it to be. I think sometimes the solution to that is, for instance, we have a seafood, a huge show in Boston every year, and it's not really enjoyable to go to. You're just walking around a huge convention center. A lot of people you can't really understand. They're from,
smells kind of fishy.
Yeah, it smells a little fishy. People have stuff out on the counters for 3 days. You try and get samples on the first day, and you're not supposed to take samples past day 3. So it can get a little edgy there. But sometimes it just takes walking up to someone, a booth there. Like for instance, before COVID hit, I had a real sourcing initiative with myself that I wanted to go ahead and start building relationships in Indonesia. As I took on more responsibility in my role, I wanted to grow relationships in Indonesia because we didn't have any. Luckily, that got expedited because of COVID. But last year in the Boston Seafood Show, I went up to multiple Indonesian little booths, and it was just hi, I'm Logan. I work for the fishing company. We do shrimp. Can I have your business card? What kind of shrimp do you guys produce? Blah, blah, blah. Get the details. And all it is a business card. And then when we're under pressure and I'm like, hey, I know Phu in Vietnam, I've talked to him, seems like a good guy. I'll talk to our customers, see if they've worked with them before. They've had a good experience. I have Phu's email, I have his number, and there you go. There's a connection that I'd never done business with before. And now on a consistent basis, I'm on a Zoom call with Phu. I'm messaging him on WhatsApp, and I'm slowly building that relationship. And he, rightfully so, he didn't get all of the volume he could have gotten right away because we needed to ease into it. But I think that's, I was trying to think of a really good, awesome sounding answer. And sometimes it's just, I need to go get a business card at any chance I get when I'm overseas or there's a convention in the US. And I think it's just constantly thinking and knowing your market and knowing, hey, India is getting overwhelmed with a lot of stuff even before COVID. And I think Indonesia is going to start rising as a strategic supply geographically. So I think sometimes it's as simple as that as well.
Yep. Another company that I've been helping, they said that in addition to that, you may have had conversations that with a supplier that for some reason you ended up not going with at the time, that maybe now's the time to revisit with them. So they gave an example of actually a local supplier that had been trying to earn some business from them, and at the time they were fine. Now they're not, and said, what, actually that can give us huge premium in terms of speed of response and proximity to the market. Now is the time to revisit the conversation, and that was very quickly restarted. So, it may not only take a business card, you may already had some preliminary discussions. So, the other thing, Logan, that you were talking about is the issue of, make sure that you know your supply chain. All right. So, in addition to finding potential new sources and potential new suppliers, if we're going to manage across multiple suppliers and multiple locations, the issue of knowing your supply chain and being able to coordinate that across becomes more important, because that becomes more complex, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it becomes, and the importance of this has been highlighted by COVID. And to me, there's kind of two reasons that I think you should really know your supply chain. First, I think it helps you build a relationship. It gives you context to who you're working with. I can easily just think about what the producer that I'm talking to in India, I could only worry about him, and then everything that goes wrong up to when I take control of the product, I can just blame on him. And if I don't take time to learn that, okay, he's a producer, he has his own factory, he has to buy shrimp from a farmer, the farmer has to buy shrimp from a nursery, and then he has to choose how much he wants to put in his pond based on the volatility of the market. So if he's scared of COVID, he doesn't want to risk putting shrimp in case, retail stores, something crazy where orders stopped, he might only put half as much shrimp in as he normally does. And then the nursery, and to grow out in ponds, you have to have feed. So you have a feed mill. And that's just a few of the major partners involved with shrimp. And if you don't understand that, you can't understand the issues that your direct supply chain partner is seeing. And so it's easy to say, you can't give me the shrimp that I need. Why is that? And if I don't listen and I don't understand what's further down the supply chain, then one, that doesn't really help me with my relationship with him. I think every relationship takes context, and that's your context in that sense of the word. And second, I think it helps you plan more efficiently, because you'll never get a perfect plan from your supplier. You'll never get perfect updates. But if you have the ability to fill in the gaps with your knowledge, then I think that's really helpful. And in that sense, I'm bringing in shrimp across the ocean, and when it gets to the port, just because the ETA is November 15th doesn't mean it's available to our customer on the 16th or the 17th. I need to understand from a logistics standpoint, how long is it sitting in the container yard? Okay, we have 4 free days at the container yard, and then it takes a day to dray, and then it takes a day or two to get to the DC. And knowing all of those steps along that process helps me better communicate to my internal partners, and then also to our external partners, going both ways, to our customers and to our suppliers. So I think it's really important from a relational standpoint and also from a planning internal standpoint.
Yeah, I think that it's one thing if it's going to take a while, but at least if you know it, then at least you can know it. All right. So I think that the practical advice that everybody, no matter if you're an SME or a Dow 30 company, map out your supply chain. Show what the steps are, who the major players are, and involve your suppliers in developing an understanding of what some risks or concerns are and how that changes over time. Because I often say, the majority of your risk may happen far before it ever becomes your risk. It may happen well before it gets to your supplier. So the more you can work with your suppliers to develop a good understanding of pain points, bottlenecks, short-term or longer-term issues, and work together to agree upon approaches to handle risks that may materialize and to collaboratively work through. I think it goes a long way. I've heard a lot of companies that, I gave the example of inventory buffering, that you do that with your suppliers. Do you have any extra that I might be able to get? Can I pay you earlier so that you can take a proactive, material position in a material market that you have to buy in in order for me to eventually supply to me? So there's a lot of things you can do in collaboration. So, love that perspective. Dale, what are your thoughts about making sure you know your supply chain and unleashing the potential of your supply chain to get better visibility and risk responsiveness?
Well, it's important to know not just who you're working with, but who they're working with as well. And that's where the depth and where the real work sometimes comes into play. And let me just give you a couple of examples. Is like you can diversify a provider and move from a country of origin from one country to another, but you got to be careful to make sure that, for instance, the base materials from a commodity standpoint and what you're buying are going to be readily available in the new country of origin, for instance, if you're looking at. We've seen this you see this in many industries where you'll move, you'll seek to diversify, for instance, and drive out some of your reliance on China. And then what you'll do is you'll find out that some of the base material is still coming from China. So you have to be, you need to be savvy. You need to do your due diligence. And it's not always easy from a small to medium-sized business standpoint, but it can be done. And once again, that's the reason if you have either a buying agent or someone else on the ground, that's part of the requirements you need to set for them. It's not a matter of knowing that I can get the product at a certain FOB price point or whatever the case may be, but that the material and the base material and the availability is going to be there as well. And as you mentioned, sometimes you might want to go in and put a blanket order out there from a standpoint of, based on your cadence and your buying, that you're going to want to take X number of units or whatever the case may be over a period of time, but you're going to extend that out over a period of time so your supplier, from a collaboration standpoint, can make a purchase or a buy and ensure that they're covered from a base material standpoint. So those are the kind of things that you just think through when you talk about knowing your supplier, knowing your supply chain. That's the depth that you want to be thinking.
Yeah, super. Before we turn to questions, I wanted to address near and local shoring for a moment, because one of the ways to reduce dependence on a limited number of global sources is to consider diversifying by potentially including near and local sources. Logan, you said that you had looked at it, but you haven't necessarily done it. So any pointers on the potential of using near and local sources?
Yeah, in my sourcing market, it's a little bit different because the shrimp that I'm getting from overseas is not available at near the capacity that we would need it to. So that's never been a huge thing on our list to do at least in the shellfish department. You can't get Vaname shrimp in the U.S., but there are people who do it, and we actually have aligned with them to come alongside them and give them volume to grow that. And Fish In is always looking for opportunities that if it's not there in the market, how can we be a help to that? So how can we help the one Vaname shrimp producer in Texas who does 3 million pounds a year, which would maybe last a week in our supply chain? How can we help bring that to fruition? And if we never use them in a substantial way, how can we still grow that and be a part of an initiative that may not be there, but could possibly be an emerging market in the future? And then there's also there's different domestic types of shrimp. And so also, if we can't bring Vaname to the US, how can we take advantage of shrimp that is in the US, which would be Gulf shrimp or cold water shrimp up in the Pacific Northwest? And we do the same thing. We may not have a home for some of that, but we are always looking for emerging markets to reach into and to invest in. And it doesn't always work out. We've already done some of that with Gulf shrimp, and it didn't work out. But we are doing it with Vaname, and it's going in the right direction. And so I think, for me, it's a little bit more limited on that front, but there are still ways, even when it's a limited market, both for domestic versus international importing shrimp. There's still something there that we can be a part of and drive positive change in that way.
Super. Dale, your thoughts on near and local shoring, how you approach that?
Yes, you approach it by looking as hard as you can for local opportunities, because in the U.S. specifically, there's many commodities that, in a general way, we've divested and removed ourselves from, and the pandemic has proven that that's not always the best thing. Organizations like ourselves, we've had some success. Other companies, I'm aware of, and other industries have had success as well. We're seeing it become a much more prevalent topic in the history over the last 5 to 10 years. It wasn't always something that was the most prevalent thing that you would talk about from a global supply chain. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing more and more conversation and concentration on maintaining at least maintaining domestic options. And so once again, we're seeing some success. Other companies I'm aware of in other categories are seeing success as well, but it's not exactly something that you can snap your fingers and pivot. But it is happening. And the expectation, I would say, from a standpoint of most people in supply chain industry, in any industry, is that we're going to become more competitive in some of these and bring some industries home, or simply to be a little bit more in control related to supply chains, especially highlighted some of the constraints that we run into related to the pandemic.
Yep. I actually think that, the trade war has, in a way, helped us start this a little bit sooner than we otherwise might have. And it's actually been a little bit of a helping factor from that perspective. I know 2 examples. One is in the flooring industry, where actually for this US manufacturer, their Chinese supplier has decided to set up an operation in America to become a local source. That's a scenario. The other scenario is the e-commerce company that I referenced before that I coach, and they've seen that even though there is a bit of a cost premium, involved with local manufacturing in certain cost factors, they're also seeing that there is a premium for the made in US label that their customers are appreciative of, and they're obviously seeing that the ability to potentially respond and deliver faster in their omni-channel is of value to them. Apart from, of course, the fact that it enables them to have a greater positive impact on the economy in the region in which they're based. So I agree with you. It's not one that you can just do overnight, but there are opportunities of varying nature and degrees. So a topic that deserves further consideration, I think. So let's turn to some questions. Donnie, I don't know if you want to pull one from the chat or if you want to pull one from some that Denise had shared with us in advance. Where would you like to start?
Sure. I think some of the questions that came from some of the partners of World Trade Center that Denise sent to us would be really good to kind of dive into a little bit. And one of the first ones is, so when you're thinking about some of the challenges of COVID and particularly as you're thinking about some of the challenges that small and medium-sized enterprises would deal with. Dale, I know you talked about agents and trade associations, and Logan, you've talked about the suppliers that you were connected to with Walmart and some of those preliminary things. But let's just say you're starting from scratch. What's that first step to take that now it's a different world that we're operating in? There's political unrest in places. There's challenges getting goods in and out of various countries. What are the first steps that you would recommend the small and medium-sized companies to take as they're trying to either find new sources of supply or find different countries that they're working in, how to navigate those waters? And Dale, let's start with you.
I mean, I'll go back to the fact that even if you're in a small to medium-sized businesses, you're typically in a product line that you understand quite well, and so you're going to know the support mechanisms, or you should research and find out the support mechanisms from a standpoint of whether it's trade associations or support groups that are out there, and you should be able to find opportunities to leverage knowledge and skills, and especially knowledge base that are out there related to the products that you're evaluating and looking at. And from there, you're going to find that, pretty much on most continents, if you're looking on a global basis, that you're going to find out that there's a lot of different activities that you can tie into. And the most important thing, as I think about this, is the fact that whether you're a small organization or whether you're running a division within a large organization, you have one significant advantage that you haven't had in the past. And that is and this isn't COVID related, but it's been accelerated by COVID to some extent. And that is technology is on your side from a standpoint of as an aid that it hasn't been there before. So for instance, an organization like ours, as we hunkered down and got into our bunkers related to our COVID quarantines, right? We worked remotely, but we also needed to interface and work with groups on the other side of the world. And so our days were very long because we ended up with an awful lot of video conferences and WeChats and all kinds of different activities overnight. But the point of the matter is that technology, the ability to introduce yourself to different groups, to work with different groups, to become familiar with different groups through the use of technology, I think is an asset that even 5 to 10 years ago, even though we did have some great technology, it wasn't quite as prolific as it is right now or as capable. And today you've got that as something that's definitely an aid to your efforts.
Great. Logan, would you like to add anything there?
Yeah, no, I think Dale really hit it. I was like writing out kind of what I was going to say. And the first thing right before Dale said it, I put understand your product and market. So understand at a foundational level what you're working with. And then from there, you're working at you're gonna know your market. You're gonna know what countries do what best. You're gonna know what regions of what countries do what best. And so, like for example, right now, if I didn't know my market and I just went to each country and I was trying to source smaller shrimp, I would have a real difficult time in any other country besides India, and then specifically Southwest India. So I think knowing that is like really essential and foundational to then kind of reaching out. You have to build that respect. You have to be able to hang in conversations with suppliers to gain their respect. If you're a smaller company, I know my personal journey, it took me a year to be able to hang in a conversation with someone at a shrimp plant in India, for them to even give me the time of day. So I think that's really important. And then I think taking that and having core values and initiatives from your company and aligning that with your understanding of the market and going after strategic relationships. And I think to me, Dale hit it. And then I'm just kind of soundboarding what Dale said. So, but I think it's really important to understand first and then align and then start reaching out.
Yeah, I can agree. Azu, thanks for your question. Do you want to ask it live? Do you want to unmute and just make sure that we understand the question that you want us to address? Azu? The question was, what is the reason to find sources closer to the Americas? So if your question is why consider local and nearshoring, it goes back to the starting point of our discussion. We may have become a little bit too reliant upon global sources and not be diversified enough. And whereas that can be very beneficial from a cost of goods sold, it may create tremendous logistical risks and costs. So the benefit of considering near and in-market sources is that you reduce the length of your shipment pipeline. You may reduce some of the logistics costs associated with running a global supply chain, and you may have the benefit of being able to respond a little quicker to changes in demand. It may come at a bit of a factor cost increase, but for a lot of goods, consumers may actually appreciate the made in label. So, does that get to your question a little bit, Azu?
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute and I couldn't. Yes, I work with Mexico specifically, and I know that there's like tons of good manufacturing facilities there, and it just boggles my mind why America does not, take advantage of the ease of trying to transport that product, and the fact of turning the key, if you're doing all these colors and one color is producing more, being able to change it quickly. And it just seems to me, really kind of, a lot of manufacturers have gone all the way to the other side of the world. I'm originally from Peru. I lived in Northwest Arkansas for over 30 years. And just recently I have seen products coming from Peru. One of those is blueberries, and they're amazing. And I was like, why didn't we have this earlier? And I think South America is a good source of all kinds of different products too. It's just a matter of manufacturing, taking the time to explore that. And so
no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that if you look at the apparel and fashion industry, they've been at that a little bit longer, and you've seen that they've aggressively moved away from only global sources to have a much more balanced and diversified supply chain that includes some global sources, but also some near sources and even local sources. And it far enhances their ability to be responsive to changes in demand, and it far enhances their logistical capability also. So, Dale, any additional perspective from your end?
I mean, one of the reasons you want to look domestic, nearshore is obviously beyond just diversification, is there may be advantages related to especially lead time. Now, unfortunately, you're going to find in a lot of product lines and a lot of different categories, you may not find good nearshore opportunities. But if you can, then you're going to be able to weigh two things. You're going to be able to weigh your cost on a landed cost basis. So, for instance, Remco, it might be true that your cost out the door is a little bit higher, but by the time you land it domestically, it might be better off, or at least that gap may be reasonable for you to be able to overcome from a margin standpoint. And then, of course, from a transportation, and from a lead time standpoint, you may be able to greatly decrease your time to market.
Yep. Yep. I agree. Maybe a quick last question, the specific issue that was brought up, the role of certification in this process. It's one that you haven't, you touched upon in passing a little bit, Logan, when you said like qualified suppliers. How do you think about the importance of certification?
Yeah, and I actually think one of the other questions on that list we got was, what are 5 pitfalls of creating an ethically sourced supply chain, and kind of morphing those. I think the certifications are there for a reason. There's been stuff that's happened in the past. I was actually talking with our compliance director this morning saying like, hey, like I work with you on a few certifications, but what all is there? And she sent me a list of so many acronyms and letters and SMETA, SA8000, BSI, MCI, all these things I'd never even heard of. And in seafood, we work with MSC, BAP, FIP, RFM, and I don't even know what all of those mean. But as fishing, and we like to say that we're an industry leader in ethically sourced supply of seafood. Seafood is a really shady industry, probably one of the most shady that I've heard and seen of the things that are happening in the industry. The way people source, the way people are using workers in different countries, people pumping product full of water, salt to, get that extra weight. And so to us, the way we fight that is through all of these certifications. So we have social compliance certifications, food safety, sustainability, traceability, importation. There's all of these certifications that are vital at every step of the supply chain to make sure that there's not anything that is happening that's unethical. And so to us, we cannot function if we're missing one aspect of one certification. And I mentioned earlier the feed mill, the nursery, the farm, the production plant. There's a certification called Best Aquaculture Practices, and it's BAP. And you have to have BAP 4-star if you want to play with the big dogs, the big retailers. And that means having certifications all the way back to the feed mill. What are they putting in the feed? And if they're putting stuff in the feed that doesn't pass BAP certification, you're not allowed to use that feed mill. And if that's feeding all of these farms, those farms are now out the window. And so to us, it's vital. It's a foundational part of our business. And our compliance seems unbelievable because it's, you have all the stuff leading up to getting to the US. And then when it gets here, they have to file SIMP, and that's 60-page documents. So it's really vital to our business. Yeah.
I know we're coming up. Thank you. I know we're coming up on time. So maybe just real quick firing round for all three of us, like 1 to 3 things that an SME can do right now. And I'll start. I mean, my suggestion would be, number 1, talk to your suppliers about risks that they're seeing that you may not be aware of. Number 2, create options for yourself by having supply backups and alternative sources. And number 3, don't ignore the value of trying to explore if there are near and in-market sources that you can build into your supply chain. So those are 3 I would suggest. Dale, 1 to 3 suggestions for SMEs to take home right now.
Build and strengthen relationships, and then on the backside of that, trust but verify. And then absolutely positively keep an open mind for new opportunities as you look around the globe.
Super. Thank you. Logan, 1 to 3 takeaways.
Yep. Giving your planning process and supply chain structure flexibility is 1. Building strategic partnerships and continuing to grow those and not becoming stagnant. And then for us, it's find the good, because we believe at Fishing, the power to change is unlocked by finding the good in everything rather than focusing on the negative and looking at the things that are happening bad with COVID, instead looking for the good and building off of that.
Super. Well, it's been a pleasure to share this discussion with the two of you. And thank you for so generously sharing from your wealth of information. Again, Denise, thanks for getting us together. Donnie and Christine, thanks for making it possible. Back to you with great thanks from us.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Remco, thank you for facilitating. Great, rich discussion. Dale and Logan, thank you so much for giving us your time today and your expertise. And so what a great session of learning. Move through some technical, challenges like all supply chain professionals have to do right now in just about everything we do. And so we're just thrilled with your participation and the learning that we can pull out of this. So again, I did want to ask one real quick question as we tidy up. And that is, there are government agencies that provide services for small and medium-sized companies. Do either one of you actually use any of those agencies whenever you're starting to explore sources around the world? And if so, what would those be? What would you recommend those?
Want to Dale on that one?
No, I mean, we're in a highly regulatory area, so we're going to lean on FDA and a lot of things related to clearing and ensuring that we're going to be able to meet. It's no sense going to a supplier and working on any kind of requirements or anything like that if they're not going to be able to meet the regulatory and the technical requirement beyond just the product need.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay. Well, thank you guys. Again, we'll sign off today and look forward to the next webinar. We'll be talking about logistics and the actual movement of those goods in and out of countries in our next webinar. So thank you everyone very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.